Beryl is a middle-aged swordsman who runs a dojo in the middle of nowhere and lives a peaceful life. One day, while he is training, his father turns to him and says he really wishes he had some grandkids to look after. It's been years since Beryl took over as the instructor here, but he's still as maidenless as he was before. Beryl says he's been too busy with the family dojo to think about having kids, but his dad still wants him to at least try. He even suggests that Beryl should try raising up one of his female students so he can get married, but for ethical reasons he refuses. This dojo has been in Beryl's family for generations, and he has been diligently working as the instructor here ever since he took over from his father. Once he dreamed of achieving great things like becoming a famous sword master, but while he is definitely a better swordsman than the average person, he doesn't think his skills are worthy of the sword master title. With that said, he thinks of himself as a good teacher since many of his students have gone on to become successful swordsmen after graduating. Once practice is over for the day, Beryl goes home to have dinner with his parents, but his dad is still insisting that he get married already. Beryl's dad tries to get his friend to pressure Beryl into finding a wife, but she says these things take time, so there's no need to rush him. However, she is still expecting Beryl to give her a grandbaby. Beryl chokes on his food a little because that's a lot easier said than done, especially since he doesn't even have a girlfriend yet. And it's not like a pretty girl is just going to show up at his door. A few seconds later, there's a knock at the door, and Beryl opens it to find a pretty girl standing there. She greets him as her master, and after taking a closer look at her, Beryl realizes that she's one of his former students, Alicia Citrus. Beryl invites her inside and offers her a cup of tea so they can catch up. Beryl remembers Alicia being a gifted student back when he trained her, but he never could have expected that she would become the commander of the Royal Knight Order. Anyway, Beryl asks her why she came to visit, so Alicia explains that part of her duty as Knight Commander is to train new recruits, so she took it upon herself to recommend Beryl as a special sword instructor. She even got approved as an Imperial Order, so she came to inform Beryl of the good news. Beryl never asked to become an Imperial instructor, so he considers declining the offer, but his dad tells him that people can get executed for disobeying an Imperial order, so he can't just ignore it. Alicia assures Beryl that he won't be killed if he refuses the offer, but he would probably face severe consequences for it, so he had better just go along with it. She already has a carriage waiting to take them to the capital, so they can leave now, and tomorrow, she'll give him the details of his new job. Beryl can't believe Alicia expects him to leave right now, but his dad is already on board with the idea, so he wishes Beryl good luck and tells him to find a wife for himself while he's in the capital. In fact, he says Alicia would make a great wife for Beryl, but Beryl tells him to stop saying stuff like that because it's making Alicia uncomfortable. There's way too much of an age gap for him and Alicia to become a couple, but Alicia mumbles under her breath that she wouldn't mind. Anyway, Beryl doesn't want to find out what the severe consequences are, so he agrees to the offer and accompanies Alicia to the capital. While the two of them are sitting in the carriage, Beryl notices that Alicia is still using the sword he gifted to her. This is a sword Beryl gives to all the students that graduate from his dojo, and Alicia has taken special care of hers ever since she got it. Beryl is glad to see that she values his gift so much, but he doesn't think that sword is good enough for a knight commander like herself to use. He says she could find something better at any other blacksmith, but Alicia says this sword is the perfect one for her. Beryl assumes she must be so attached to that sword because as her former master, she still believes that anything she gets from Beryl is superior, but he is just an ordinary swordsman, so he'd never be able to cut it as a special instructor. Just then, Alicia speaks up and says she is so excited that the hillbilly sword master is finally coming to the capital. Beryl has no idea who she's talking about because he's not a hillbilly, and he's definitely not a sword master, but she tells him that he is well known in the world of swordsmanship. He has trained dozens of students who went on to become legendary swordsmen and adventurers, so he is a bit of a living legend, although Alicia isn't happy with the nickname he got. Beryl finds the story interesting, but he's convinced that Alicia is the only one who thinks of him as a sword master. Soon, they arrive at the royal capital, so Alicia drops Beryl off at an inn so he can rest, and she says she'll come pick him up tomorrow morning. The next day, Alicia takes Beryl to the castle and introduces him to the Knight's Order. She informs all of the recruits that Beryl is so strong that even she would be no match for him, so they should feel honored to have such a skilled man as their teacher. However, a couple of the knights don't think Beryl deserves to be in such a high position, and one of them is particularly unhappy about this. A little while later, Beryl is talking with Alicia in the halls, and she is congratulating him for officially becoming a special instructor. She tells him he only needs to come in to train the recruits 3 or 4 times a month, so it shouldn't interfere too much with his usual lessons at the dojo. Just then, a girl comes running up to Beryl, and she's so excited to see her master again that she can hardly contain herself. Her name is Kiruni, and she was a student at Beryl's dojo 2 years ago. He recalls that her dream was to join the Knight's Order, so he is glad to see that she actually made it happen. Although Kuruni is still only a trainee, so she's still got a lot of work to do before she can become a proper knight. With that said, she is happy that she'll get to train under Beryl again, and the same goes for Alucia. Later that day, Beryl returns to his home, but as he opens the door, he finds that yet another one of his students has come to pay him a visit. His name is Randrid, and he came to introduce Beryl to his wife and newborn child. Beryl is happy to see that Randrid is doing well, but his father cuts him off and says Beryl shouldn't bother coming home until he has a wife and kid like Randrid over here. Speaking of Randrid, after graduating from Beryl's dojo, he went on to become a platinum rank adventurer, but now that he has a child, he wants to retire and move back into the village. Platinum rank is pretty hard to achieve, so Beryl is surprised that Randrid is willing to give it up so easily. But then again, being an adventurer is dangerous work, so he probably doesn't want to risk it while he has a child to take care of. While he's here, Randrid promises to do his best to run the dojo, but Beryl has no idea what he's talking about. Beryl's father tells him that since Randrid is decently skilled, he can take over as the dojo's instructor, and that means Beryl won't have to stay here anymore, so his father is kicking him out, even though Beryl owns this house. The next day, Beryl explains the whole situation to Alucia, and explains that he needs to find a house here in the city. The inn he slept at yesterday was a little too luxurious for him to stay there permanently, so he wants to find a place that's more affordable, and Alucia is more than happy to help him look. She asks him if he'd like to come and live at her house, but Beryl doesn't think that would be appropriate, so much to Alucia's disappointment, he turns her down. Alucia then asks him if he would like to get some food with her since it's lunchtime, and Beryl is fine with that, so they start heading for a restaurant. However, while they are walking, someone calls Alucia shameless for walking around town with a man and calling him master without a second thought. The girl and Alucia seem to have an unpleasant history together, and the girl thinks it is outrageous that a proud knight commander would be running around with a random man. Beryl has been trying to hide his face so he can avoid conflict, but the girl wants to see his face, so she pulls the map down, and as soon as she recognizes Beryl, she calls him master too. Beryl is confused by this because he has no idea who she is, so she reminds him that her name is Serena, and he once saved her and taught her how to use a sword. It takes a while for Beryl to remember, but he eventually recalls finding an injured girl 20 years ago. He took her in, nursed her back to health, and eventually taught her how to fight, but he hadn't seen her in over a decade, so he's pleasantly surprised to see that she's a black rank adventurer. Serena apologizes for not visiting Beryl all these years, but she's also curious as to why he is suddenly in the royal capital. Alucia explains that Beryl has been appointed as a special instructor for the Knight's Order, so he is moving to the capital, and she is here to help him find a suitable inn. However, Serena says she'd be much better at finding accommodations because, as an adventurer, she was used to staying in inns. Serena and Alucia start arguing over who gets to go house hunting with Beryl, and Beryl has no idea why the two hate each other so much, but with their help, he eventually manages to find an inn that suits him. He thanks both of them for their help, but he asks them to please stop arguing with each other for his sake, because he can't listen to any more yelling. Out of respect for Beryl, the two of them stop arguing with one another and quietly walk home. Beryl watches them from a window, and while he can't say he will enjoy all the excitement of city life, he thinks it's nice that he will have so many of his students around to take care of him. The next day, the Knight's Order is training as usual, and the Vice Commander, Hemblitz, is absolutely dominating all the others with his skill. After defeating his sparring partner, Alucia suddenly makes an announcement and informs everyone that there has been a change to the schedule. Instead of once a week, Beryl will be instructing them starting today, so she expects them to work harder than ever before. Beryl tells them all that he's happy to be here, but before he can begin his first lesson, Hemblitz approaches and says he has something to say. To be a special instructor for the Knight's Order, Beryl would need to possess a certain level of strength, so he is challenging him to a duel. Hemblitz isn't trying to be disrespectful, he simply wants to make sure that Beryl is good enough for the position, and as the Vice Commander, he is within his rights to ask for a duel, so Alucia sanctions it. Beryl really wishes she would stop agreeing to things on his behalf, but since Hemblitz challenged him, he has no choice but to get ready for the duel. Hemblitz is sure that Alucia only thinks highly of Beryl because he was her instructor when she was a kid, but that doesn't mean Beryl is cut out to be a special instructor for the Knight Order, so Hemblitz is going to prove that by defeating Beryl right now. Beryl agrees with Hemblitz because he doesn't think he's good enough for this job, but it would look bad for Alucia if the man she recommended lost easily, so he decides to do his best against Hemblitz. The duel commences, and Hemblitz charges in to attack Beryl. Beryl begins parrying the attacks, and he is amazed by the sheer power and speed that Hemblitz possesses, but he knows that if he can deflect one of the strikes just right, then it will leave Hemblitz wide open and he can close in for a strike. That's exactly what he does, and Hemblitz is left speechless because in a real battle, he definitely would have died just now. That counts as a point for Beryl, so the two of them return to their starting positions and Hemblitz begins attacking again. Beryl still can't believe how strong Hemblitz is, but all of his moves are predictable, so it was pretty easy for him to parry. Hemblitz realizes he won't hit Beryl if he doesn't go all out, so he uses his signature move to attack. The Roaring Blade technique has so much power behind it that it can't be blocked or parried, so there should be no way for Beryl to win here. However, after Hemblitz swings his sword, Beryl disappears and reappears behind him with his sword next to Hemblitz's neck. With this, Beryl has officially won the duel, and Hemblitz isn't even mad about it. He is just amazed by the skill Beryl just displayed, and he apologizes for being so rude earlier. Later on, Hemblitz holds a party to welcome Beryl as the new instructor, but he still really wants to know how Beryl managed to counter his signature spin move. Beryl explains that all he did was move along with Hemblitz's rotation, which is how he ended up behind him, but doing it is a lot harder than Beryl makes it sound. In any case, Hemblitz is looking forward to training under Beryl, and so are the others. A week has passed since Beryl became an instructor here, and while two of the knights are practicing together, he comes over to give them some advice. He has been watching how they fight and their swordplay is decent, but he thinks they need to work on their distance. He demonstrates that if you focus too much on watching your opponent's sword, then your opponent can get closer without you noticing. It may not seem like much, but in a real sword fight, half a step of distance can be the difference between winning and losing. Beryl thought he was just giving basic advice to his students, but with how everyone is looking at him, you would think he just spit the greatest bars of all time. Ever since Beryl's duel with Hemblitz, the knights have treated every word Beryl says as gospel, and he has to admit that it has made his job a lot easier. Once practice is over for the day, Beryl sits down to relax and Hemblitz hands him a towel to wipe his sweat with. A few minutes later, Kiruni approaches Beryl and asks him if he has any plans after this. Beryl wasn't really planning to do anything, so Kiruni asks him if he would like her to show him around town. Now that Beryl thinks about it, he hasn't had a chance to see much of Baltrain yet, so he takes Kiruni up on the offer, and she excitedly runs off to go change her clothes. Meanwhile, Alucia is busy meeting with the royal officials to give them a report on the state of the Knight's Order, especially with the new special instructor who was hired recently. Alucia assures them that Beryl has exceeded all expectations, and since there is nothing more to discuss, the meeting comes to a close. People had warned her that if she wanted to continue developing her swordsmanship, she should avoid becoming Knight Captain because of all the bureaucracy. The only reason she took this job was because she needed a position of power to bring Beryl to the capital. Back when Alucia was still a kid, her parents brought her to Beryl's dojo so she could learn how to defend herself. And from the moment she met Beryl, she knew he was a kind person. After she joined the dojo, Beryl had her practice her sword swings and jump across tree stumps to train her mobility. He also had her do some basic strength training, and while his methods may have been a little unorthodox, before long, Alucia felt very comfortable using a sword. One day, Beryl asked Alucia if she would like to have a mock battle with him, and she excitedly agreed because she wanted to show off everything she learned. However, when she actually went up against Beryl, she couldn't find any openings in his stance. Since Alucia grew up learning from Beryl, she thought all sword instructors were as good as he was, but one day, when Beryl took them out to participate in a mock battle against another dojo, she realized she was wrong. The person she was up against was full of openings and had the patience of a toddler because he blindly attacked Alucia without a plan. As expected, Alucia mopped the floor with him, and it was barely even a challenge for her. Once the mock battle is over, Beryl and his students start walking back to their dojo, and Beryl is glad that his students got a chance to face people who had different fighting styles. Speaking of which, Alucia asked Beryl if his dojo happens to be better than average compared to the others, but he doesn't like to think of it that way. Sure, they may have won the mock battle today, but it's more important to focus on what you learned from the experience rather than whether you win or lose. Alucia understands the point Beryl is trying to make, but then she notices that her hairpin is missing. She realizes she must have dropped it back at the dojo, and it's really important to her, so she tells Beryl that she's going back to get it. Alucia eventually arrives back at the other dojo, so she starts looking for the hairpin she dropped. But unfortunately, it looks like the guy she defeated found it before she did. For a second, it looked like he was going to be nice and hand it over without causing trouble, but that would make too much sense. Instead, he throws the hairpin into the dojo and says Alucia is going to have to take all of them at once if she wants to get her pin back. She may have beaten him in the mock battle, but there's no way he can lose when he has all his friends backing him up. Considering how trash their sword skills were earlier, Alucia might have a good chance at beating them all on her own. But she knows Beryl wouldn't want her to use her skills to beat other people up, so she just stood and was totally ready to get clobbered. However, before the jerk could smack her face, Beryl steps in front of Alucia and takes the hit instead. The strike did no damage to him, but it still hurt a little, so he asks the boys if this is really how they want to use their swordsmanship. The jerk still doesn't understand that what he is doing is messed up, so he tries to strike Beryl on the head this time. However, Beryl easily ducks down and disarms the jerk in one swift motion. He then goes on to parry a bunch of the jerk's friends, but before things get any worse, the master of his dojo shows up. He heard a commotion and ran over as soon as he could, but he is very disappointed to see his students behaving in such an uncivilized manner. He kneels down to sincerely apologize to Beryl and promises to make sure this never happens again. Beryl and Alucia begin walking home together, and Beryl explains that he got a bad feeling when Alucia went to get her hairpin, so he followed her to make sure she was alright. Alucia feels bad because Beryl got hit because of her, but he tells her the hit wasn't that bad. And besides, she didn't do anything wrong, so she doesn't need to blame herself for what happened. If anything, he thinks this was his fault because as Alucia's teacher, he shouldn't have let her go alone into a potentially dangerous situation. Years go by and Alucia is in the middle of another mock battle with Beryl. Beryl's form is still as solid as ever, but this time, as he swings his sword, Alucia is able to keep up with him and score a point against Beryl for once. Beryl is surprised by how much Alucia had improved, but he believes she is finally ready to graduate from his dojo, so he presents her with her ceremonial graduation sword. By now, Alucia had come to realize that Beryl was ignorant of how godly his sword skills are, and she really didn't want to leave his dojo because there was still so much she could learn from him. But at the same time, she didn't want to cause trouble for Beryl, so she didn't argue with him over it. Instead, she set out to prove that Beryl's techniques are superior to all others, so she enrolled in the Knight's Order program and took the entrance test. And just as she expected during the test, none of her fellow candidates were a match for the training Beryl gave her. Even the examiners couldn't keep up with her, so they would never stand a chance against Beryl. He possesses near-inhuman reaction time and observational skills that far exceed any normal person, so there's no doubt in Alucia's mind that Beryl is the greatest swordsman in the world. However, Beryl isn't aware of his skill, and knowing him, he would happily live out the rest of his days as an unknown swordmaster, but Alucia refused to let her master remain unrecognized. With her skills, she slowly rose through the ranks of the Knight's Order in hopes of gaining the power to support Beryl, and by the time she had finally acquired the position of Knight Commander, it had been 10 years since she left Beryl's dojo. And in that time, Beryl became even more amazing than she remembered him to be. She feels a little guilty about appointing him as an instructor without asking first, but it was the only way she could get him to leave the village and gain some recognition. She returns to the training hall and meets with Hemblitz to ask how training with Beryl went. Hemblitz tells her that it was amazing, and that they all learned so much from him today. Alucia doesn't see Beryl around, so she asks if he already went home for the day, but Hemblitz tells her he actually left with Kiruni because she said she wanted to show him around town. Alucia gets a little jealous after hearing that because it means Kiruni basically asked Beryl out on a date, and she wishes she had thought of it first. Meanwhile, on Beryl and Kiruni's date, she is showing him all the wonderful shops they have in town, and Beryl is amazed by how lively this place is compared to his village. Although he wonders why Kiruni brought him to the Western District, since all the tourist attractions, like the Church Palace, are meant to be in the Northern District. Kiruni says he is right, but once you've lived in the city for long enough, you see the palace and church all the time, so it gets kind of boring after a while. But Beryl was actually looking forward to seeing it, though. While they are still walking through the market, Beryl hears someone call out to him, so he turns and finds this girl walking towards him. She is calling him master, so she must have been one of his students, but he has no idea who she is. She also seems to be good friends with Kiruni, but he still can't remember who she is. The girl is disappointed that her master has forgotten about her, so she points to her sword to remind him that she was one of his graduates. Beryl thinks about it for a few more seconds, and he finally remembers where he has seen the girl before. Her name is Ficelle, and she was indeed one of his students. She spent 2 years training alongside Kiruni, although she looked a lot different back then. It has been 5 years since Beryl saw her, so she was bound to have grown up a lot since then. And she's been doing pretty well for herself in the capital, because she is now the ace of the Magic Corps. Beryl is happy to hear that she is doing well, but he's a bit surprised that she joined the Magic Corps because he doesn't remember teaching her anything about magic. Kiruni asks Feist if she's here to do some shopping, so she explains that she came to buy some magic accessories. Beryl has never heard of magic accessories before, so Feist picks one up and explains that it allows anyone to use magic. Although she is capable of using magic without any accessories, Beryl is surprised that Feist can really use magic on her own, but then again, she did say she is part of the Magic Corps, so it makes sense. Just then, Beryl hears a woman scream because her purse just got snatched. As soon as he sees this, Beryl gets ready to chase the guy down, but before he does anything, Feist tells him he can let her handle this. She then draws her sword and covers it in magic before slashing the direction of the thief. Her slash releases a burst of magic energy which ties the thief's legs up, and once he hits the ground, Kurumi apprehends him. Beryl is impressed by how well the two of them handled the situation, especially Ficel's magic, because he has never seen anything like it before. Ficel explains that she basically covers the sword in magic whenever she fights, and Beryl's training is really useful when it comes to adapting the magic for combat, so she is thankful. And Beryl is equally thankful that Ficel is still using all the techniques he taught her. The next morning, Beryl wakes up early to go for a stroll through the city, but while he is walking, he hears someone calling his name. He turns around and finds a little girl standing there, so he asks her if she's lost. The girl yells at him for treating her like a child because she is the head of the magic corps, but Beryl thinks the girl is just playing a game, so he doesn't believe her. The girl is starting to get frustrated by the fact that Beryl doesn't believe her, so she demonstrates her power by spawning a huge fireball from her finger. Beryl finally believes that she is part of the magic corps, but he is surprised that such a little girl could use magic like that. She tells him to stop calling her a little girl. Her name is Lucy, and she's a full-grown adult. Okay, maybe grown is a bit of a stretch, but she's a lot older than Beryl is, so she will not stand for him treating her as a child. Feist told her all about Beryl and how amazing he is, so she wanted to meet him in person. She is sure that Beryl must be an excellent teacher because Ficel's skill with the sword is exceptional. But Beryl says Ficel's success is due to her own hard work. All he did was teach her the basics. Beryl has been walking with Lucy to be polite, but she eventually leads him into a wide-open area, and any gamer can tell where this is going. Lucy is very fond of her magic, so she trains every day to improve as much as possible. However, she doesn't have anyone worthy to practice with, but since Beryl is a legendary sword master, she thinks he will be a good challenge for her. Before Beryl can even respond, she tries to hit him with a blast of fire, but he jumps back to dodge it in time. Beryl would have preferred to avoid fighting altogether, but with the way Lucy is staring at him, it doesn't look like she will let him go until he gives her a proper fight, so he draws his sword and gets ready to face her. This was the end of episode 2. Subscribe to not miss the next part.